You know what? Looking at my Masters collection, old Trapjaw is looking a little bit outnumbered by the good guys. So let's do something about that. In this video, we're going to be painting Skeletor from Masters of the Universe. So he's all printed out, he's been tidied up, and he has also had a coat of primer put over him. He's in quite a few pieces, because there's quite a lot to him: the cape, the hood, the head, all separate elements. You can see that I've painted the skull black, and I've also done the same for the base. That's going to help with painting later on, because it will help with the shadows. Everything else is been covered with grey primer, and not really a great deal to say. He went together fairly easily. Yeah, he's mostly hollow, and he was printed in 1/8 scale, which is the scale I tend to do for a lot of these cartoon statues. So let's start hitting this guy with some paint. I'm going to start with the biggest area of the body, which is the skin. So you could go a number of different ways with the skin. The colour of Skeletor over the years hasn't really been that consistent, so it's really up to you whether you want to go for a deeper blue or even up to quite a sort of almost turquoisey blue like the action figures had. I think I'm going to go for a sort of mid-tone. So to start with, I'm going to go with McCrag Blue. Now, as I said, this is quite a sort of medium tone blue. So I think this is a good base and colour to start with, and then I will start building up the colour and going lighter from here. So the next stage for the skin is to take it up a colour. So I'm going to do a dry brush using this azure colour from Vallejo. Now you can use any sort of lighter blue that you have. Now obviously with all dry brushes you want to get most of the paint off the brush. Just test it, see how much you're leaving behind. Once you're happy, then it's just a case of going over the whole piece in a sort of circular motion, just trying to grab those raised areas. Now you could leave the blue there if you wanted to, but I want to take it up a notch. I want to get it a little bit closer to how I remember the action figures, which had a slightly sort of turquoise look. So for that I'm going to go with some Zimmer blue. Any sort of turquoise will do. And this again, just a repeat of the process we just did. Just a dry brush across here, across the whole piece, just to bring that colour up a little bit. So this is the results of all that dry brushing. I'm fairly happy with that. I think the recesses are nice and dark, it brings out the muscle tone and gives a bit more interest in the colours. So yeah, I think that will work. So what I'm going to do now is take some black. I'm going to paint in his pants, and I'm also going to paint in his claws on each of his hands. That is then followed up with a dry brush using some neutral grey, and you need a very small dry brush for this, just to catch the edge of those nails. I'm also going to use that same grey to do dry brush across the underpants and also the soles of the boots, which I've already done in black. Now across all the clothing of Skeletor is all pretty much the same colour, which is handy from a painting point of view. So it's all purple. I'm going to start with Nagaroth Knight, which is a nice deep purple from Citadel. And it's going to take a little while because obviously you've got the cloak and skirt and hood and all sorts. Now, despite what I said earlier, I'm actually going to do a slightly different purple for the skirt and the chest armour, because I just want to break up the colour a little bit. So for this I'm going to use a nice sort of burgundy colour. So still purple, but just a slightly different shade. So the next thing to do is to do a dry brush over all of that purple. I'm going to use blue violet, and this is quite a nice brighter type of purple without going too bright. So this is going to be across absolutely everything that we've painted purple previously. Next up is some gunmetal silver, and that is for the metal studs on the shoulders and also on the skirt parts. Those silver studs are then covered with a wash using Nuln oil. If you don't have Nuln oil, you can just make a very watered down black. Followed by a little bit of stippling of Runefang steel, which is a slightly shinier silver. So for the skull, I want to try and match what you see with the action figure, where the skull is kind of green and then it goes to yellow in the centre. So to start with, what I'm going to do is a dry brush of a dark green using some Caliban green. This is going to be dry brush across the whole face. Now I've painted the face obviously black to start with. That's going to help with this method because all the recesses will already be black. So I can just go across the face like so. And what you should see, might not be that easy to see in this light, but the recesses in the eyes and the nose and the mouth have stayed black. Same process again, this time using Goblin Green, which is a slightly more yellowy green. Last of the greens now, using some Moot Green before I start using the yellow. Now what I'm going to do here is just sort of bring it more into the centre of the face. So we get a kind of an effect where the further out, the darker it gets. I'm going to start introducing some yellow now, starting with a bit of deep yellow. And then finally I've dropped down to a much smaller dry brush just to be a bit more precise with this last one. And it's going to be a dry brush of Moon Yellow. So that's the result of all that dry brushing. I'm pretty happy with that. You can see the yellow fades into the green, which is what I wanted. So let's just do a quick test fit, see how he looks in the hood. And yeah, I think that works pretty well. I think it definitely looks like Skeletor. Okay, so I'm good to go. So Skeletor doesn't really have any armour, but he does have this kind of metal cross, bone cross on his chest, and he also has a staff. Now obviously you've got the ram's head, but what I'm going to do is paint both of these the same colour. I'm going to use a fancy new colour I've not used before, Royal Purple by the Army Painter. This is a metallic purple, so let's see how this looks. Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's very bright. But yeah, a couple of coats of that should do. So I'm going to do this cross, as I say, and the staff as well. And then I'll come back and add a bit of more detail. Now, using a black wash, I'm just going to reinforce some of the shadows and just do a bit of outline here and there. I'm doing the same thing with the staff. So just again adding into the recesses, so I've done across here, and likewise just to give a bit of shadows. Finally, taking the brightest silver I have, which happens to be Runefang steel, I'm just going to work in a couple of scratches in the notches here and there just to give a little bit of battle damage. So nothing too crazy because this is very bright silver, so a little bit goes a long way. For the ram's head skull, I'm going to start off with some bone white for the head. That is then followed up with some sandry dust, just concentrating on the horns. That is then followed up with an all-over wash using some Agrax Earthshade. which is a nice deep brown wash. With that brown wash applied, he's looking pretty grubby at the moment, so we're going to tidy all that back up with a dry brush. We're going to basically go back over with those colours we just did. So sandry dust for the horns, and it will be bone white for the rest of the skull. Next is a dry brush of Moorcast bone, which seems an appropriately named colour for this, and this is just going to go over the skull. I'm going to leave the horns and then come back to that with a different colour. And then over those horns, a dry brush of Baler brown. Okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit here because I'm just not quite happy with the colour of the skull. I think it's just a little bit too light. So what I'm going to do is take some Seraphim Sepia, so it's a sepia wash effectively, and just run it over the skull. And I think that's closer to the colour I've got in my mind. I think the horns are okay. It's just this face that's not quite looking right to me. So hopefully once this dries, that should be it. So this is the final result, what I'm sort of happy with now. I did do another couple of dry brushes. I did a Mournfang brown over the horns because they just weren't quite dark enough. I think it wasn't looking quite right to my eyes. And I did another dry brush of Screaming Skull over the actual face part. So I think I'm happier now with that than I was before. I honestly paint skulls every different way you can think of. The amount of skulls I've painted over the years, considering I've painted a lot of Warhammer, but for some reason I paint them differently every single time, and I never remember which way is the best way. So I really should write things down. And here is the staff all finished. You can see the little bits of silver damage here and there. Okay, so with this done, that's all of the actual figure done. So let's now move on to the base and get this guy finished. So for the base, you guessed it, it's going to be a whole lot of dry brushing all over again. So I'm going to be using a lot of colours actually that I've already used with Skeletor. Starting with a purple, so that Nagaroth Knight, then a dry brush using a burgundy, then going up to Screamer Pink, Pink Horror, and then finally a grey, Administratum Grey over the top. So I'm going to do these colours over all the main part of the rocks, and then with these sort of jagged teeth, I'm probably going to do that, I think, in colours of green. Still not entirely sure, but I think that's what I'm going to go with. So anyway, let's start with the purple. Now the general rule of thumb I like to apply when doing these dry brushes of lots of different colours is I always start off heavier and work up lighter. So with the first colour being this dark purple going on, I do quite a heavy dry brush. It is on to the burgundy next. Screamer Pink next. On to Pink Horror. And then compared to the others, a fairly light dry brush of this Administratum Grey. So this is the finished result after all that dry brushing. So next part I'm going to do, there's actually a load of vines that are creeping all the way across the base here. So I'm going to paint all of those in next. It's probably going to take a little while, but I'm going to start with some medium olive and just follow those across and try not to get any paint on parts I've already done. So that did take quite a while just to put all that green in. There's a lot all the way around the base. But there we are, we've done it. So next thing to do is throw a green wash over that. I'm going to use some Athenian Camo Shade, which is a nice dark green. And this will just run over every one of those vines. It'll just bring a bit of depth into there. And while that green wash is drying, I'm going to do a dry brush using some Lubrical Green across all of the teeth. I'm going to follow that up with a second dry brush of wire flesh across all those spiky teeth sticking out. Finally, I'm going to do one last dry brush using some Death Guard Green, and this is going to be all over the vines, just to give a bit more interest on the raised edges. And with that last little bit done, I think I'm going to call that finished. So I can now put the model together, and I can come back and I can show you the finished result. And here is the finished result. And do you know what? I'm really happy with this one. I'm particularly pleased with the skin, the way that came out. Quite happy with the skull as well. I think those are my sort of two standout parts. You can see, say, the yellow into the green. So I tried to sort of capture. You can see it a little bit more when he's turned around. And yeah, I'm really pleased actually with just the whole thing. It's a pretty easy model to paint because there was a lot of dry brushing involved. But it just goes to show if you can get the hang of dry brushing, you can get some fantastic effects. Look, just with the nails alone, that was just sort of dry brushed grey over the black. You can see all the depth in the fingers and the knuckles and everything, just using those three different blues. So obviously it helps if you've got a model that's got a lot of texture, which this one does have. You can see all the veins popping out. Still not 100% satisfied with the ram skull. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know. Something's still not quite looking right in my head. But yeah, on the whole, pretty pleased with this one. The base took actually a fair amount of time to paint in all those vines and all those teeth, so not the most straightforward base, but I think it works pretty well. I'm pretty happy with the overall result on that. So all in all, a really nice addition to the collection, and he will look great next to the others, and it'll definitely give Trapjaw a friend. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of that, and if you would consider subscribing and liking and commenting and all that type of jazz, it really does help push the channel. And until next time, take care everyone, and I will see you in the next one.